and welcome to a special edition of World Insight coming to you from Boao, the tropical city of Hainan Province. The annual meeting of Boao Forum for Asia concluded on Friday, encouraging consensus for shared future, concerted actions, and common development. But how to translate words into action? Today, we are presenting to you two in-depth interviews to resolve that problem with two men of wisdom. Ban Ki-moon, chairman of the Boao Forum and former UN Secretary General, and Zhou Xiaochuan, vice chairman of the Boao Forum, who also is China's former central bank governor. They come in from different perspectives with immense knowledge and different but strong track records. First, my conversation with Zhou Xiaochuan, Chinese economist, longest-serving central bank governor in China and a reformer. His winning the 2019 Central Banking Award provides some clue of his strong leadership and sophistication both as a policymaker and as an economic leader. As the vice chairman of Boao Forum, my interview with him started from what this platform can do. What can the Boao Forum for Asia and other platforms play their roles in communicating between China and the rest of the world? Mr. Vice Chairman.
I think since the early of this century, Boao Forum has been already play very good roles in communication among the political leaders, economic leaders, especially the business community.
But Mr. Vice Chairman, the question really is, they heard, but whether they listened, those are two issues.
You know, it's depends very much on the media.
I know you would say that, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Surely, there's not only the media. For Boao, I think that this year's we create to some extent better quality of annual report on the economic outlook, on the competitiveness ranking, on the Asia regional economic integration, and on the Asia financial market development. But surely I know that it's quite a sick for media.
I'll go back and read it.
But you can read the digest.
I think you arouse a lot of interest and curiosities among our viewers about that specific report, Mr. Vice Chairman, by saying so. Now, since you talk about this is not only for Asia, it's beyond, but many of the Asian economies have already become global ones. Mm-hmm. And the lessons and experiences from these economies are extremely important. Japan, for example, people recently have been talking a lot about what can we learn from the lessons of Japan's so-called lost decade.
Each economy should try to avoid the serious bubble, either real estate bubble or financial market bubble, or the other kind of bubble, because nobody really knows what kind of a bubble. Theoretically and practically, it's very difficult to completely avoid the bubble. When you have a certain kind of bubble, hopefully it's not very large bubbles. That's when the bubble bursts. That's you need to learn the skills how to deal with that process. Not to create too much panic, too much pains, try to avoid mistaking policy making, and to reduce those of a painful adjustment. A lot of skill in this regard.
What are exactly some of those skills?
It's mainly in terms of fiscal policy, monetary policy, and that's the regulatory changes, which can, to assist the macroeconomic adjustment, rather than, to introduce a big pricks into the bubble. So actually, that's you need to consider those of structural reform, and you need a time to let the corporate sector, let the financial sectors to repair their balance sheet. It can be quite a gradual process.
Yes. There's always an issue of time, right? So how will economic policies, as you beautifully illustrated these, it has to be a gradual process. I noticed that you said every point with that emphasis. Vis-a-vis the impatience of politics and the so-called immediate political wills these days.
It's different from country to country.
Yes, indeed.
So, fortunately for China, that our government has much longer views. We saw some of short-term behavior. So on the one hand, I think economic decision maker should have a very good communication with politicians. Try to reach a consensus. They don't have a fundamental conflict among each other, but when they look at the problem, they may came from a different angle. So especially some of the economic issue need a lot of macro and microeconomic knowledge. So it needed to have a good communication. Something is also related to the historical experience. So you need to talk about what's the historical experience we have in our hand, not only about the specific country, but globally. Another is for those of difficult structure changes, you need to seize the window. So sometimes there is a good window, sometimes it's not. Partly it's maybe related to the domestic opportunities, but also it's also you should look at international. The structure reform sometimes is difficult, but if you take correct windows to start it, it's easier to reach a consensus.
Are we at the window? China, for example?
I should say that, for example, now we emphasize that supply side structural reform. 3 or 4 years ago, we started to do that. Yeah, we got good windows. Recently, you know that it's some of more challenge appeared. One is the trade friction exacerbated. Hopefully, we can see some of positive solution to appear. Another is the global slowdown of economic growth. So it creates more difficulties. So the window may also change from time to time.
The trade frictions, Mr. Vice Chairman, many believe it's about confidence rather than the specific numbers on trade. So how do you look at the short term of maybe possible good result that both sides mutually agree upon, and the long term of this, the nature of relations between China and the U.S. and the nature that China is a rising economy and people are looking at it with a very different perspective now?
When I listen to the discussion in economist circles, they also emphasize very much the uncertainty. But not only trade negotiation, because we need to restore multilateralist global system. So we are waiting to see this, the WTO reform and the whether we could reach a better result of that or not.
It looks like a very dirty political fight, though, if you look at the different suggestions provided by different countries for WTO reform now.
So there's several tiers of uncertainty. I think that's for this year because of G20 meetings and the other urgency. 2 days ago, here is a panel on the WTO reform. Yes. And the participants talk about dispute settlement mechanism, which need appellate body. To play a very important role to that. So pessimistically, it's may dysfunction in quite soon. So we have urgency to do that.
As a big trading nation, what can China do? From your perspective, Mr. Vice Chairman.
I had some chance to join the forum or think tanks discussion on this topic. On the one hand, the precondition is to see China and the U.S. should reach some kind of negotiation result. The second, I think that for the WTO reform, we need to have a good preparation and the communication among the Ministry of Commerce and think tanks to really have a serious discussion that's why the WTO, why the Doha round have a difficulty to continue and to reach a good function. And then that's how many issues. Now there are several of very important issues. That's what we can do is that. Frankly speaking, some of critics are actually directed to China, and whether China, not very much to the central government, but the local government or the other government body may have some remaining subsidy to the exporters or to the sectors. There are also the technology transfer, protection, intellectual property rights, state-owned sectors, those of issues. So I think China need a very serious internal discussion as to how to deal with that. We have a very important emphasis on multilateralism against the protectionism, call for not to have unilateralism. But how to participate the WTO reform debate. Right. And that's what we can do internally to show our sincerity. That's not only ask the others to maintain the WTO, to maintain the multilateralism, but we also do what we need to do domestically to meet the higher standard of a global trade system. I think that's also important. Up to now, some of the European think tanks, Canada, I also saw that some of Japanese are preparing their ideas for the input of G20 meeting on this topic. The Chinese side also have a quite intensive internal discussion. I hope them can accelerate this process to timely provide that's what China think that the WTO is going to to reform.
When you were serving in China's financial sector, encountered several rounds of difficulties. One of them was at the turn of this century, when China had about 686 billion, if I remember right, bad loans. And the country urgently need to have cash and urgently need to get the economy moving. So how did you and your colleagues in the Chinese government come up with the ideas, and how that idea eventually got things done?
As I said, that's when we talk about Japanese lessons, in the crisis or after the crisis, anyway, you need to have a timely remedy of the financial sector. One thing is to repair their balance sheet. So they need to write off or split those non-performing loans and to recapitalize themselves. But a little bit complicated because it needs to have a concept of those of macroeconomic policy making and the skill of macroeconomic policy usage. One of them is so-called the national balance sheet. You need not only look at specific banks, they have a balance sheet problem, but you need to look at the national balance sheet to see what kind of resource you have, what kind of problem you need to deal with. In China, another issue is we need to get correct data. How serious is the problem? The data actually is in the accounting book, so we need also to use the higher standard of accounting to realize the size of a book and the size of a problem. Yes, you need also to see that in the process of recapitalization, after the rating off of those bad loans, the recapitalization, on the one hand, the government may have some resource to help, but we really need for the future for those financial institutions to have equity finance from private sector, from foreign capitals. So this is come into another big story, how at that time those things have done. Finally, that's one those of large financial institution got to be listed in stock market and had IPO fund resource to solve their balance sheet. Whether they can continue to maintain the quality of their balance sheet, whether they can really try to avoid another round of crisis, they need to have to establish a good corporate governance.
Right.
So that's
comprehensive.
The comprehensive things, and at that time, I think a lot of Chinese decision makers, central bank, Ministry of Finance, and the others work together to find ways to solve this problem.
That's Zhou Xiaochuan, former Chinese central bank governor and vice chairman of Boao Forum.